Hi, I wanted to follow up a little bit on our React discussion about setting up a project, show you what you can do with some of the tools, and kind of give you a walkthrough on what we can do. So I set up a demo app here. This is our little repo. If we go ahead and clone this down, you can go ahead and run it. But real quickly, let's just start off with a Create React app. We're using our Fluent components. We're going to have a detail list rendered out. We want to show that in Storybook. Storybook allows you to kind of tell a story with your components and kind of in isolation, so you can tweak things and do things that you wouldn't normally do in an app. And then, of course, we want to have some testing. So Cypress is a library that we can do acceptance, integration, and unit level testing. Here we're going to demonstrate our acceptance level, but specifically how we can mock out the API so that we can either work ahead of the back end or just test specific scenarios without having to have the API up and running. So let's go ahead and get started. So if we go ahead and come up back to the demo, after we've cloned this, we just have to run this command, this yarn start all. What this will do is actually it'll install all your dependencies, of course, but then the start all is a command. If we look at our package JSON, it's actually going to run a couple things in parallel. So it's going to start your normal dev server. Then it's going to open up Cypress, and then it's also going to open up Storybook for us. And we can see that in the output down here. It says start Cypress and Storybook. A couple of those things will, since it's running in parallel, it might take just a second, but it is working, and we'll see. Should see some things pop up pretty quickly. Okay, so the dev server has popped up here. One thing to note is that a lot of times when we're doing our components and stuff, and it relies on an API, we don't have that data to be able to run specific scenarios. So because we don't have that data and we would have to kind of mock things out and put some test code in and stuff, that's not usually a good best practice, because some of those things get left in the code and we get checked in and then it just creates a mess. So what we can do is we can go ahead and put the component in our app, and if the API is not returning anything, or if we're just running it locally, that's okay. It doesn't need to return any or have any information displayed. We can use some of our other tools like Cypress and our Storybook to kind of help us out a little bit. I'll click on the getting started here. It should take just a second. Okay, so let me flip back over to my browser here. Okay, so we have our local host. Again, that app that isn't making it is making an API call, but it's just not returning back any information because our API isn't up. We can go to the network tab and see that it errors out currently, but we want to see what happens if it actually has data. The next tab over is a tab called Storybook. I left the examples in here just so you can go through and kind of see some of the docs and everything. Under dashboard here, there's a list of requests. What Storybook allows you to do is kind of set up specific stories or scenarios, and I found that this works really well when you're doing different components or different kind of interactions that you want to test. And PMs love this because when we go to do our demos or we go to do our code check-ins, we can say, here's a specific scenario that's hard to replicate in the app, but if we want to kind of tweak some things, this is how you do it. Let's see an example of that. So when I click on a list of requests, this is our detail list. It's just a shimmer list because we don't have any data loaded. But there's actually a scenario of that because we want to see what it looks like when there's no data. Maybe we want to show this shimmer list. Maybe we want to show an error message or say a message that says no data. But this no data option here will show us what is the default when there is no data. Of course, we can see what happens when the API returns a set of data. This is all mocked data, so it's randomly generated. So if I go here and click on another tab, this should be complete new data. If I want to demonstrate data and kind of mess with some of the data and see what some of the different scenarios are, there's some utilities called knobs that work with Storybook really well. Say we want to see how the change ticket number or the path or just what happens if there's a really long value in the column here. What we can do is come down to the items here because of the knobs is enabled in this scenario. We can go ahead and change the data for any one of these columns. Because it's all mock data, it's just a string here. But the PM is specifically asking what happens if there's a really long name or there's data that's just returned from the API that just isn't going to fit in that column. Well, we can type in some really long information, and then we can see how it's displayed. The thing that I wanted to demonstrate is see what happens if it goes past that column. Well, if I can make this smaller, I see that this is an ellipse and it cuts off. Maybe we will also want to add some hover text or whatnot. This is a great area to demonstrate all those different features. So we have our live dev server. We have Storybook that shows no data with data, and then data that we can mess with and kind of demonstrate different scenarios. What about some tests? Well, if we come over back to our browser that runs our Cypress tests, again, there's some other generated example code and tests. But if we come up to the 0 dashboard, we'll actually run a test here, and it will load from the top. So I guess one important thing is Storybook is actually loading the component itself. It's not loading the whole app. Cypress will actually load the whole app, just like we did with where we got the empty data list. But now instead we have the ability to mock out our API calls. So if we go up to the top here, we can see that our first action, as we hover over things, it'll kind of highlight and show us what the app is doing. It allows us to kind of time travel and see what our app is doing. So we see a local host here, so the app isn't really loaded yet. Then we get the page to load, but we see that the first thing it does is it loads that empty data list with that shimmer effect. Then we can see that there's a fetch call here that says it's going out to get our request, and I just have a dummy URL that we're fetching. I'm going to mock that response, and so right after that response happens, I go ahead and the detail list will now render out information. I just have a simple test or assertion that it will loop through and make sure that this first column for every column or for every row that's returned, that the column matches the correct name. So because it shows, I think it's 20 names by default on the page, it makes different, that many different assertions. There's a lot we can do with Cypress, but the good takeaway is that with the dev server, we can put our components in without having to have mock data in our actual production code. We can then mock the different scenarios at the component level with Storybook, and then we can have our assertions and our different higher level acceptance tests with Cypress. This is just a high overview. I don't expect you to copy over the code into our project, but I want to kind of give you a chance to play with it, kind of poke around, see how it all works, and then once we get a chance to work together, we'll actually make sure that you understand how it is, and then I will have you make this code into the new project, and I'll make you type the commands and do all the code to make sure that you understand it and stuff. So just a high level overview of how to get React, Storybook, and Cypress working together. If you have any questions, let me know, and then I look forward to our next pairing session.